of the CILIP Scotland Conference. It's wonderful to see you all here. Particular welcome to anyone who's just joined us for day 2, and welcome back to everyone who was here yesterday. I'm Sean McNamara, Director of CILIP Scotland. We had a fantastic day yesterday. There was so many brilliant and inspiring talks. There'll be videos shared and there'll be slides shared for anyone that wasn't here yesterday, and hopefully you can capture some of the magic. We have Claire, a visual recorder over here, who also captured day 1 beautifully, so that's a great way to catch up. There was so many highlights yesterday. Just highlight a few. Jamie LaRue in the morning talking about censorship. One of the choice quotes from that was, parents do not want their children to know about wolves, but children need to learn that wolves exist, to summarise the importance of libraries and that avoidance of censorship. Everyone else was fantastic throughout the day. We had a wonderful after-dinner speaker last night, Kevin Gilday, who had some fantastic quotes about libraries, such as, libraries are not a luxury, they're a vital indicator of a healthy society. Libraries are a symbol of our civic health. And libraries represent the hope for strangers we will never meet. And I think all of those quotes really captured what so many of you do, whether you work in public, academic, school, or different types of libraries. And it was so inspiring to hear that articulated so beautifully. Before we move on to the first keynote, I've just got a few announcements. People here yesterday, you'll have heard most of these, but I'll just go through them for people that have just arrived today. So this is City Suite, so any talks that say City Suite on your programme will be in here. The exhibition is through there. The art gallery and the Melbourne room are just up on the mezzanine. You can take the lift, but it can get quite busy, so do take the stairs if you can and are able to, and staff will be around to direct you wherever you need. We had a fire alarm test this morning. We don't have another one planned this morning, so if a fire alarm goes off, there's 2 fire exits over here, or if that's not available, then you can go back out the way that you came in at the main hotel entrance. The lunch will be served in the main restaurant. The breaks will all happen in the coffee room there. If you do have any dietary requirements and you have let us know about that, the hotel staff should be aware. Just give them a wave, flag that up to them, and they'll make sure they get you the food that you need. And again, if you have parked your car, make sure you give your car registration to reception so that you don't get a fine for that. Last night we were also delighted to present a couple of awards. 2 of them are here, so just to say well done again to, first of all, our Outstanding Achievement Ian McCracken Award winner Jimmy Mitchell. And massive congratulations to all our nominees for Scotland's Library and Information Professional of the Year, Claire McCormick, Emma Gray, Cavan Stafford and Alison Nolan. So just a quick round of applause for our nominees. They're all absolutely fantastic. And delighted to say the winner of that was Alison Nolan. So well done, Alison. So yeah, we're delighted to welcome you all, members, colleagues, speakers, exhibitors, to this, the largest gathering of library and information professionals. Reminder, we have an interactive map. Get yourself added to that. There's a QR code on the registration desk if you need it. We have a team of volunteers. We have Shona, Alison, Audrey, Margaret, Keith will be happy to help, and my team members Leah and Kirsten will also. Just look for the Happy to Help badge and we'll be able to keep you right if you need anything at all. Thank you to all the exhibitors for their support, which is absolutely vital to the conference going ahead. The exhibition is open throughout. Please do engage with them. If you get 5 signatures in the back of your bookmark, enter the prize draw and you can win a Chromebook at the end of today. So please do that. The exhibitors will be happy to give you a signature in exchange for a chat. Thanks again to the Scottish Library and Information Council for providing so many bursaries, as well as our branches who provided bursaries to ensure that so many people can get there, at a time when training budgets are particularly challenging. Thank you to our platinum sponsors, Bolinda and Biblioteca, for sponsoring our keynotes and the dinner, and Bolinda for sponsoring the Scotland's Library and Information Professional of the Year Award. You have a protest and suffragette card in your conference packs. Many of you will have been trying to find your panels. I don't think we've had as many pairs discovered yet, so we've certainly had a few, so there must be a lot of pairs out there. Go and chat to people, find out if they've got the same card as you, get a picture taken, email us it, or put it on social media with the conference hashtag, and you'll be in a draw to win a free place next year. What else do we have? We have a scavenger hunt, that's at the back. It's on the registration desk as well, so do take part in that, and you can win a free day place next year. We put in an email about makerspaces. If any of you are involved in makerspaces, or keen to be involved in makerspaces, then the University of Dundee are going to be holding a meetup just outside the art gallery. So if you would like to go and chat to them about their fantastic create space and maybe to start building a network around makerspaces, then head up there on the first break and you can do that. Also in the first break, if you haven't checked out the hotel, then please do that, because we've been told that we really need the rooms back, but you can still check out at 11:20 when we have the break. Loads of sustainability stuff. Check your programme for all the information on that. If you've brought a reusable coffee cup, thank you. Go and scan the QR code and you can get into the coffee card prize draw. Other than that, I just would like to wish everyone a fantastic day. Hope you enjoy the programme, and I'm looking forward to meeting as many of you as possible. Now, before I introduce our first speaker, we have some lovely awards to give out. So every year we have student awards, which are an annual celebration for library and information students who have excelled on courses at CILIP accredited universities. And those universities advise us of who has won those awards, and we provide them with student medals. So I'm going to ask each person to come up one at a time and take your medal. We'll probably not get, we might try and take a picture, but we'll definitely get a picture at the first break with you, if not. So the first person I would like to invite up is Sheila Brown of the University of Strathclyde. Well done. Second student is Emily Morbach, who is from the University of Glasgow. Can I invite Emily? And finally, from Robert Gordon University, we have Fiona Johnson. Fiona? Good walk-up tune, thank you. Okay, right now I'm delighted to welcome our first keynote speaker, Dr. Mia Ridge. So a little bit about Mia. Mia is the British Library's digital curator and part of the digital research team. She provides advice and training on computational research, AI machine learning and crowdsourcing. Mia was a co-investigator on Living with Machines and co-curated the Living Machines exhibition with Leeds Museum and Galleries. And there's so much more I could add to the introduction, but that's just a smidge of what Mia does. So we're delighted to have you, Mia, and I'd like to welcome you up to the stage. Get your slides up.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean, for the invitation, and the team for making this conference run so incredibly well and smoothly. I don't know about you, but I was incredibly inspired by Kevin's after dinner talk last night, just really reminding us why libraries are so important, how they change lives. And I think coming from the British Library, the one thing that you might know about us is that nothing works at the moment, so it's a particularly good time to be inspired and reminded about why this work is so important, even when sometimes it's a bit of a slog. So, I thought an easy way to start is Let's All Agree Information for All is a fantastic vision. It's a nice way of bringing us together. But I wanted to push slightly on that and think about what about information from all. And going through the exhibitor hall, I could see that there are lots of ways in which libraries here are asking the public about their opinions. Which books are your favourites? What do you value? Why are libraries important to you? So there's clearly a desire to hear from people. But how far through your organisation does that desire penetrate? So perhaps people in the front line, the people in the exhibitor halls, the people running these programs might have a great sense of what the public wants and they value hearing from them. But as you go further up the organisation, does that desire permeate quite as deeply as it does through front of house or frontline people? And to push even more on that, what if we think about information from all, including from machines? So we're all hearing a lot about AI at the moment. We're all feeling some pressure to keep up to date, to understand what it means for us. In the commercial sector in particular, people might be saying it's a way of reducing your headcount. Maybe you can replace people with machines, and I think that is absolutely not the way that we should be going, but we need to think about how we marshal our arguments against that and how we understand how we can implement technologies to actually help people doing work, reduce the boredom and the tedium of some of the work that we do, and give us a chance to flourish at work. At the moment, it seems like machines get to do all the creative stuff. They write songs, they create images, they write texts and poems, and we get to do the boring stuff, and that is absolutely the wrong way around. So let's think about what that means. So in short, what I want to think about today is how we invite digital volunteers to do meaningful work with collections. And coming from the British Library, a lot of our work is to do with what you might call special collections. I work in Western Heritage collections, which sort of predates, at most we go up to 1950, and that's considered like racially contemporary for us. So we don't have the same issues that people in other departments do in working with contemporary publishing, commercial publishing, the information that we get from commercial vendors as well as current publishers. But also I want to think about how we can use AI to make these collections more accessible and more findable. So it's all about getting people in front of collections, because collections exist to be viewed, to be read, to be explored, to be understood. There's no point getting computers to do all that work if it means that people spend less time thinking about collections. So information from all means thinking about where the boundaries are in an organisation. So we have this kind of out there idea where you might put things out on social media, you might do have your say campaigns, like vote on things, nominate things. And then we have things like reuses of open data. And those are things that happen at an arm's length in some way from an organisation. They're not designed to take the data back. You might do a campaign where you have a hashtag, but are you collecting the information that you get from that hashtag? Is that then accessioned as a data set, or does it just fade when Twitter finally collapses? So that it happens out there, and we're kind of comfortable with that. And then there's ways that we can work in collaboration. And for me, crowdsourcing is one of those ways where we might ask people to transcribe or tag images or text in some way. Community collecting as well, where we either go out and help people digitise their family collections that might have some relevance to local or family history. We might collect artefacts from the community, or we might ask people in the community to share what they know about the objects or books, or share how they've experienced these books. And that's in collaboration. We're creating a framework where there is an actual relationship with the institution. And of course, many libraries buy in cataloguing services, so that's a kind of collaboration as well. And then we have things like AI and data science for research, where if you're lucky, you get to work with researchers directly on your own collections. And it's not so much researchers coming in and never talking to the librarians, but it's actually working with librarians and others in an institution. And then there's internal things. So things that we might think about, like using AI or machine learning utilities. And I have to just take a little sidebar here and say, when I talk about AI, I'm really just talking about machine learning, because that's all it is at the moment. AI is a marketing term. It's easier to say than machine learning. So I might use it throughout this talk, but at the moment it's not super fancy, it's not Minority Report, it's none of those kinds of things. It is just statistical models of words and images and things in a kind of cloud of numbers. So we might use things like transcription tools, tools to discover entities, subjects, create links for improving discovery between items. And crucially, this all depends on having digitized versions of material. If you don't have a digitized version and you've only got metadata to work with, it's a lot harder. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that digitizing collections isn't necessarily funded or thought of as being a kind of sexy thing that we need to do, but you can't do the sexy bits if you don't have the plumbing. So digitization for me is the kind of plumbing that makes these things work. And then we know that people are using things like ChatGPT to hopefully not do things like performance reviews or write cover letters, but we know that people are asking it about help to write little bits of code that you might be writing Python to move images around in a directory. You might ask it to, you might use Canva or something to generate a flyer for an event. So we know that people are using these little kinds of tools, and AI is kind of creeping into our organisations in these sort of seeping through the doors ways. Even if you don't have an actual strategy about how your organisation is going to use AI, it's already being used some way or another. So what changes when we think about bringing data from the outside in? So if you're thinking about sort of have your say or crowdsourcing projects, you don't necessarily know who the contributors are, particularly if it's an online program and doesn't have an in-person element. You can review their contributions, so it doesn't necessarily matter who they say they are. It might depend on what they've actually given you in terms of data or contributions. That, of course, adds work. And I think that's where a lot of this kind of process stops, because people get a great chunk of data from somewhere and then they're like, oh, I hadn't realised how much work it's going to take to tidy it up and do things. So it kind of sits there on a hard drive, but then people leave, and that connection to that material is kind of lost over time. We don't have organisational memory, and really the only way to ensure organisational memory is to put things into strategic systems that are maintained over time. Because libraries might traditionally have had people who worked in them for a really long time and a lot of organisational memory, but we've seen a lot of that go over the past few years. When you're working in collaboration, and again I'm including AI as a form of collaboration because it's made by external companies. Often they are commercial companies. They're not sharing how they created their models. They're not sharing what the material was trained on. We can generally assume that they have slurped up every bit of text and image and video that they can find on the internet. But they won't tell us exactly what's in them. They won't tell us how they've trained things. You can kind of guess, you can try and understand the kinds of biases. You can assume that generally things have a North American view, a 21st century view. They're probably reasonably white and middle class in terms of the language that's used and the worldviews that are represented, and probably very male as well, but we don't know. So you have to think of these tools as being a collaboration in that it's not internal, you didn't create the tool, you're not quite sure. There's something about keeping these tools at slightly arm's length and assessing the results of what they do, rather than just taking it as being on trust. If the computer says no or yes, you have to check why the computer is saying that. It's not enough for the computer to say that. So we get highly variable data from AI. Machine learning tools are really good at generating plausible text. So the most likely thing that you might say, which means if you've got interesting collections, they won't spot what's interesting about them. They won't tell you what's unique or special. And they might make assumptions or generalizations that are going to be incorrect. So you can use them if data quality isn't your main concern, but if accuracy is your absolute concern, then you have to think of different ways of doing things. So you can review data. It's a great way of working at scale. If you're an organisation that thinks any discoverability is better than no discoverability, then you can think about these tools. But if you need absolutely accurate answers, perhaps in a legal context or a medical context, then these tools aren't quite for you just yet. And then we have a kind of traditional internal processes, which are slow but steady, but very known quantities, and we're kind of comfortable with the fact that people take some time to go through things, but we use known authorities, we use standards, we have processes. It's kind of business as usual, but it might not be able to keep up with the challenges that we have. So this is the newspaper storage room from the British Library in Boston Spa. There's a lot, there's really a lot, and cataloguing is very minimal. And in general, depending on the kind of library that you're in, what you have is vast compared to the amount of resources that you have for cataloguing or discoverability. And we also know that communities have knowledge about collections that staff don't have. So it might be lived experience, it might be knowledge of how they might be doing their own research into something, because curators obviously don't these days have the ability to do deep specialist research. We're more generalists covering wider areas because we're all doing more with less. So there's a lot of knowledge out there that could be from academic researchers, it could be from community researchers, that could enrich our records. And we also wanted to support new forms of discovery, new research methods. We want to have that deeper and that wider engagement with collections. So social media is fantastic for wider engagement, for getting people curious and discovering something. But just like walking through a physical gallery, people can walk through and just look at a million things in a second. So there's also ways of slowing people down, getting them to look more deeply at single items and to explore them in more depth. And we see people doing even things like slow-looking videos, where you have a kind of scan and someone talking through a particular artwork or a print. It doesn't need to be a fancy method, it could be something as simple as storytelling. Storytelling is still really important and valuable. So I just wanted to take a moment to think about the fact that asking the public to help with enriching records isn't new. Any fans of the Oxford English Dictionary might recognise James Murray on the left. I love this image in part because all the white bits behind him are slips of paper that the public have sent in that give a kind of a source and an example of a word in usage. And he had to sort through those, and with his other editors, sort through all those bits of paper. And I love the fact that computers make that task a lot easier. He had an extension built on his house just to store all these bits of paper. He also had a postbox installed outside his house because he had so much correspondence. I think we sometimes feel like that with email as well, but computers have made this task a lot easier. In the middle is an example from Steve.Museum, which was an early mid-2000s Web 2.0 folksonomy kind of moment, asking people to tag artworks. And what Steve.Museum showed is that the tags that people give to images bridge that gap between vernacular language and specialist cataloguing languages. So it's fantastic that we have precision in how we catalogue things, but it can mean that people are left behind if they try a keyword search and it doesn't kind of give you anything. So if you type cherub and you know there are like fat little babies with wings around and you don't get a match, you're just frustrated. So tagging can help bridge that gap between language. And on the right is an example from, it's now called Art UK Tagger, but it was the Public Catalogue Foundation. They had people labelling portraits or oil paintings, and then they used computer vision technologies to kind of group them together, and you could really quickly say whether or not a tag was accurate. So this stuff's been around for either a couple of hundred years or decades. It's not new. And we have seen lots of different experiments, but two that come out of London, Museum of London, where I used to work. Revisiting Collections was a toolkit for running focus groups with people that had something to say about a collection. People bringing specific perspectives from their heritage, from their community knowledge. And it was also designed as a way to capture that information and map it to Spectrum originally, and then ISAG for museum and archive collections. So the idea was very much that it was an intervention in collection systems. The collection systems were like, not so much. So a lot of this information ended up being stored on Excel spreadsheets. It could theoretically be mapped into collection systems, but that work was hard to make happen. But it was still a kind of important moment in museums and libraries and archives, acknowledging that what they held could be described in more diverse ways, and the significance of those collections could be understood in deeper ways as well. And a related project run out of the Museum of London was reassessing what we collect, looking at collection items already in the library, in the museum's collections, and asking specific communities to comment on them. And they based the communities that they were looking at on the 2001 census records to understand who had made their home in London and where they'd come from. So by the time the project kind of wrapped up, they had commentary on 800 objects from 42 different communities. One of the nice things about this is that the data was actually stored in the back-end system, which is Mimsy at the time, which is relatively rare. I think a lot of times these microsites are built on standalone databases, and then at some point someone pulls the plug and all that information is lost. So to take a step back and think about why we might do crowdsourcing and citizen science, like why now are we asking people to help us with these things? And it's a challenging moment because machine learning can do a lot of the things that we used to ask the public to do, like transcribe handwritten text. Tools are relatively good at that now. But for me, it's really important to think about it as a form of digital volunteering that lowers barriers. So we're inviting people in who wouldn't feel comfortable coming into the reading room of the British Library because it feels fancy, and you've got to get a reader's ticket, and you've got to have like forms of ID and all these things. You can't just casually drop in, but on your phone or on your laptop you can. You can just come in and access some collections. We're asking you to give us information that only people can give us at the moment. So you're helping, and I think there's something really powerful about an invitation to help where we're asking people for something, because that means that we're inherently valuing their contributions. And the thing that I love about this as well is it gets people to look really closely at collections in ways that they wouldn't have considered might be of interest. I finally managed to convince my art historian friends to get interested in the history of science by asking them to tag objects from the history of science. And then they started to think about them in ways that related to their art historical knowledge. And they finally thought astrolabes were cool, and for me that was a milestone moment. Because looking at things encourages curiosity and learning, and we make connections. Humans are pattern-making machines. So looking at collections is a fantastic way of people applying their knowledge and their experience to these collections, even if all they're doing is tagging or transcribing the name of something. And I know that not everyone has collections to work with, but if you're in a school library or something, you can do a lot of work with citizen science, like natural history observations. You can go and, I don't know, check the quality of the water in your local river. You can do wildlife observations. There's lots of projects on sites like SciStarter that you can try with people in your community. So we were lucky in the British Library that we had some resource at the time to design interfaces that were really consciously designed for both productivity and for engagement. So we wanted people to spend some time being distracted. We didn't only want them to spend all their time transcribing text. So on this slide, the blue transcribe the title part is the work part of this task. And all the other parts that are outlined in red, or the kind of cerise, are discuss the things that you're seeing, download them, have a look at them in context, have a look at the whole volume online, have a look at the metadata. We wanted people to be able to do things with the object that they were seeing, so they could immediately download a playbill of interest. And some of the other parts are they could tag things. So if someone was doing research on particular aspects of theatre history, they could tag playbills that had something about that. So we had people investigating conjurers and magicians in performances, people who were interested in plays that were advertised as being the first time here. So they could tag those things. Those tags had meaning to them, and that was just a way of supporting their research and their curiosity. And you could download all the data from the project as it was being generated. So you didn't have to wait while we took 17 years to go and fiddle through things and make it right. You could just download the data and use it in your own ways as well. And that was a really important way of giving back to people contributing to the project. And just a note about some of the learning that takes place. We ran a project on Zooniverse for the Living with Machines project. It attracted about 5,500 volunteers. And some of them are like super chatty and super into things. And we asked them, how has this project changed how you think about machines in the long 19th century? And people really reflected on what they'd understood about this from reading hundreds of historical newspaper articles. So they're really learning from these primary sources how to think about the past. And the people who took part in this project were generally interested in science. They weren't interested in history, but they found themselves becoming interested in history. So it was a way of kind of extending people's curiosity and their sense of interests by asking them to do what sounds like a relatively dry and boring task. And I think one really nice thing for me is that we did a survey and realigned it with crowdsourcing research and also with the British Library's audience categories so that we could relate these online volunteers to what the rest of the library understood as a typical reader or a cultural visitor. So if you extrapolate from this finding that 71% had no previous relationship with the British Library, even though most of the contributors lived in the UK, that's about 4,000 people that have a relationship with the British Library where they understand something about collections, even though they've never thought before that the British Library has anything to do with them. So I think that's a fantastic outcome, as well as the data that they created through the project and the insights that they shared. Okay, so asking machines to enhance information about collections also isn't new. There have been experiments in like computer cataloguing for a very, very long time, and despite the fact that we still use MARC records that were designed to fit on an index card, people have played around with what's possible with them. Hate MARC, sorry, anyone who likes MARC. This is a lovely example from a kind of code artist called Mario Klingemann. He took images from the British Library's collection on Flickr, which were images taken from 19th century books, and he grouped them by similarity. So it's a really nice, relatively early example of visual processing. This kind of thing cuts across collections, so it doesn't necessarily matter how we've catalogued the book. If someone has reused an image in a different publication, it will kind of find that. You can apply this to broadside ballads, you can apply this to stamps, to all kinds of things. It's a really lovely way of looking differently at our collections that we can only dream of doing. But by releasing open data, someone else came along and did this for us. And it's quite inspiring in terms of how these tools can make collections more discoverable and more accessible in ways that suit how people actually want to use our libraries, not what we think people want to do. So a couple of ways in which you can use machine learning are transcribing text, transcribing audio. In the past, putting videos online and doing things like online tours, if you had to create subtitles, that was a really time-consuming process. You can have software do some of that for you and then check it, and that's a lot quicker, so it means that you can make things accessible more easily. You can use tools like ANIF to suggest subject headings for materials. You can identify entities like people, places, concepts. You can find visual features in images, so actually looking at the content of an image. In particular, we trained machine learning to look at Ordnance Survey maps to understand rail infrastructure and find rail infrastructure across the whole set. Thank you, National Library of Scotland, for your incredible collection of Ordnance Survey maps and using those. You can use it to process questions and generate answers-ish. Be careful about that. But there's also things like going beyond keyword search, so back-end technologies like vector space searches that let you translate a keyword into related concepts. And it's kind of illustrated by the image on the right, which comes from a project looking at language in the Web Archive. BlackBerry went from being a concept kind of really closely associated with raspberry, strawberry, other soft fruits, and then it became associated with things like smartphone, QWERTY, keyboards. That language changed over time, so if you searched for gooseberry and you didn't get an exact match, it might expand your search into other kind of soft fruits, which is a way of reducing the kind of overhead of using a library catalogue, because keyword search is quite painful for most people. And you can also do things like search for image similarities. So it's something I'd love to do with our catalogue of illuminated manuscripts, where you get repeated motifs, lions, porcupines, hedgehogs, whatever. Searching across all those manuscripts to see these different motifs would be a fantastic way of providing a rich, generous experience that doesn't require you to be a medievalist to get going. But I wanted to just stop and think, are we valuing the data that we've asked for? So you might do a little machine learning experiment if you have any digitized text or download something from the Internet Archive, but where does that data go? We've done all this work, like collecting information from the public, we've done crowdsourcing, we've done whatever, but where does it go? Does it end up in a kind of weird warehouse situation, or does it go into systems where it's going to be looked after? And often this is what happens. Pages disappear, sites disappear, funded projects are no longer funded, and eventually they're not maintained. So there's this hope that short-term projects will leave a legacy, but if you don't do the work to ensure that legacy, it's just hope, it's not actually going to go anywhere. And as we see restructures and organisations disappearing over time, we're losing some of the legacy of the work that they've done. And one reason that that's hard is that this work requires really working across boundaries. It involves getting a lot of people in different rooms at different times and having many, many discussions about what it is that you're talking about. You have to be conscious that when you do these projects, you're adding to someone else's workload somewhere else. So, plan for that. Have those conversations in advance. Don't just hope that some metadata person somewhere has a bit of spare time and they're going to clean up your data, because who has that spare time? It's unlikely to happen. And I think particularly for these revisiting and reassessing projects, the resistance to some of the more expert voices, to hearing from front of house people, from learning people, from outreach people, was quite strong, if unspoken. So it's about valuing and really thinking hard about what things like sharing authority mean in these projects. And just some practical notes. I've recently done a survey with some others on why it's hard to ingest volunteer or machine enriched metadata into collections systems. And the biggest issue is really staff capacity, and that plays out in different ways. Like, it's hard to process the data, it's hard to do quality control. You might have, like, someone's updated the record over here, in the meantime someone's updated it there, so replication issues. The system doesn't support the fields that you need. Like, it's fantastic that we can get transcriptions for things now, but if you don't have anywhere to put that transcription, then it sort of sits slightly to the side in a different system, and that's awkward. And then we get things like priorities changed and everybody's favourite, institutional politics. But most people who answered this survey said they were able to do something, and I think that's partly because there's a lot of consolidation in the sector in terms of back-end systems. So each organisation can share what they've learned about working with those. It was very different even a couple of years ago when there were more systems around. But to finish on a positive note, often playing across boundaries does succeed. And I loved one of the comments that was just basically someone saying, we got it to succeed by in-house hustling. And I'd love to hear more from this person about, like, how they hustled, who they talked to. Did they just go and charm everyone? Did they make it seem like a really cool thing that everyone wanted to do? One of the keywords that came up most when we asked people about why things succeeded when they did succeed was agreement. So they'd taken the time to talk across the whole organisation. Who's responsible for what? How does this change different people's workloads? Where are things documented? How do the boring but important workflows and pipelines work? And that's conversations, collaboration and agreement are really important. And that's not technical, we can all do that. There might be technical bits, but that's fine. Through conversation you can figure out what they are. And the other things that were really important were standards and APIs. But basically, it comes down to people, even when it involves AI, even when it involves these challenges of working across organisations. So hopefully, you've all got some ideas, some conversations to take back, and can support each other in having these conversations. So thank you.
Thank you, Mia. That was incredible, and I think a lot of the concepts like AI, machine learning, which can sometimes feel overwhelming, whether that be to professionals or to communities. I think that really gave a great overview of how we can embrace these technologies and use them for things that we've classically done, allowing access to our collections and working with our communities. So that was fantastic. We've got some time for questions. I'm sure there's be some in the room. Would anyone like to ask the first question? Go on, kick off the day. Someone put their hand up. There we go, Dave. Thank you.
Do you want me to stand up or? No,
you don't need to.
Thanks, that was really interesting. One of my bugbears, and I'm constantly getting nagged about it, is this AI is theft concept, which you touched on. And obviously it'd be one of our main professional concerns is protecting intellectual property. How do you feel about that? I'm not asking for a BL kind of comment, but personally speaking, how do you think we should address that? Because obviously we're using tools that are built on theft, and while politicians might ignore that, should we ignore that? How do we deal with it?
I think it is a really important question, and everyone's answer is going to be slightly different, and to me it comes back to the values of your organisation. And it's really tricky because different parts of the organisation will have different views, different tolerances. We are, for us, partly about making sure that everyone has enough AI literacy to understand the decisions that they're making. They might ultimately choose a trade-off, but at least they're doing it knowing what the consequences are. So actually CILIP's sort of ethical standards have been important there for people in the library who are CILIP members, and they're also just a form of guidance for others. There's no one answer because, there's simultaneously a lot of pressure to explore these technologies, but I think particularly for generative AI and understanding where you might be taking income from creators, that's a really important part of things that I've seen. Like the BBC had some fantastic guidelines for using generative AI a couple of years ago, and now they're really exploring generative AI. So they were saying, let's not use it, and now they seem to be using it anyway. So I think it is just about tying it back to your values as an organisation. And maybe doing metaphors or similes to help people understand what it's like. And they might come back with their own metaphors or similes, but having that conversation means that at least you're making mindful decisions.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
I was wondering from a practical perspective.
Or did you want to do it just in case? No, no worries, thank you.
Hello, I was wondering from a practical perspective, in terms of integrating new metadata fields and into legacy systems, how do you see that working? Because it seems like there's a lot of history to it that makes it very difficult to update with those new relationships, and perhaps why there are more of these one-off sites for different projects, because it's very difficult to integrate.
Yeah, a lot of people do, and they have done for years, sort of blueware systems or middleware systems. You might have had one in the past to link like a DAMS, a digital asset management system, to a collection system, or a learning platform to collections. And that seems to be a way that a lot of people manage that. And I think as long as things do end up in middleware, and that middleware is maintained and part of your kind of strategic systems, that there's a backup plan, there's a recovery plan, then that's okay. And the vendors are kind of gradually responding to these needs, but also a lot of us do have legacy systems that might be end of life, or might be embedded in systems that are hard to change. But I think that having a middleware system tends to be the kind of least awful solution to that, just in really practical terms.
Thank you. Oh, we've got a question there. Govinda.
Hello, I'm Govinda Choudhury, I'm Professor of Information Science at the University of Strathclyde. You have touched upon this point in response to the first question, is AI literacy. Now, libraries historically have played a major role in educating people, right from all kinds of literacy, information literacy to data literacy, and now AI literacy. And that's my area of research. And one of the things that is becoming very blurry, if you follow the latest developments, for example, with the GPT suite, for example, the tools that they have created, that it analyzes the content and recreates the content for user. So I think the boundary now is becoming very blurry as to what is original and what is machine generated. And say, for example, so far within the knowledge context, libraries have done that over many years, centuries, that what is the best kind of product in the knowledge context? Its popularity, its originality, and sort of its kind of level of use and all that sort of thing. One of the problems in the AI generated content is that it can very quickly become very popular because of easy access, because of the social media and so on. So I think I'm trying to build kind of the research project as to how we really educate and what people should know about, and should we live in a world that something is machine generated and something is human generated, and therefore sort of we have both and we can use both, or are we sleepwalking into a situation where machines will run our life and will say, this is good for you, go and use it? Where do you draw the boundary?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen panics before about photo manipulation. The sort of 1930s Stalinist, Leninist issues that photos can be manipulated. We've seen the Cottesloe fairies, and we've had these panics before about how do we know that what we see is real. And AI makes it really easy for anyone to generate at low cost and at vast scale a lot of misinformation or just plain auto-generated content. And then it's distributed via social media and becomes kind of disconnected from provenance. But the skills of information literacy, of critical thinking, like those kinds of inoculations against being taken in by things are still really important. AI has scale always shifts things, and velocity always shifts things, but it's not entirely new in terms of the challenges of understanding the veracity of material. And the internet has been full of SEO generated content for a long time, and that's maybe not machine learning, but it was like generated by algorithms. And I think it's just about placing value on critical thinking and sort of literacy about where information has come from, as well as understanding the methods that make it easy. So if an image looks too good to be true, it probably is, but let's think about like the telltale signs that maybe make it too good to be true. And that is hard work, and it's lots of conversations, and people need to be willing to care, because some people just don't care. They're like, it's pretty, it's interesting, that's enough for me. So I think the challenges are hard, but I think libraries are a fantastic place to address them, and I think making sure that people who work in libraries feel equipped to handle these discussions, on top of everything else they're already doing, is a really important part of that work. But I'd love to chat more about your research as well.
Thank you. I think we've got time for just one more question. I think Sue, you've got that.
Thanks, Maria. That was a really interesting presentation. I think my question follows on from a couple of the questions before. You talk a lot about the way we use AI, the way we use this technology, but my question is, given libraries' role in education and knowledge provision, how much should we, and particularly organisations like yours and academic libraries, be leading on things like the regulation of AI, the kind of the teaching that's needed to make people like me understand more than an absolutely superficial level of what's going on? Because it seems to me that we are reacting rather than being proactive about what the role of libraries could be, and should we be thinking to address that?
Yes. So one reason that we did the Living with Machines project with the Alan Turing Institute was to get ahead of how things were going to be changing. Like in 2015-16, it was really apparent that machine learning was going to change what people expected from libraries, what they could do with digital content. So we did that project in part to understand what readers of the future would want from a library, and the potential of these tools to help libraries do their own work. I think we have to be having conversations with funders, with policymakers, gathering evidence, like that's what library people are really, really good at. Collating the questions, the challenges that we have, and making the case for the importance of this work, and the importance of literacy, and the importance of education. Because that evidential base and that voice is really important. And I'd hope that groups like CILIP are able to lead some of that work, because you have such a kind of a reach and so many people. So yes, it absolutely has to be done, and I just wish we all could clone ourselves so that it was easy to do that work.
Thank you for the fantastic questions, and thank you, Mia, that was absolutely wonderful. We're now just going